throw him under the bus.
David, I'm going to stop you there. Here is Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas.
In the entire proceeding, we have heard just at the beginning of the serious evidence of corruption involving Burisma, the Ukrainian natural gas company that paid Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, $1 million a year.
So
while Joe Biden, let me answer. I'll answer the question.
You answer the question? I appreciate it.
Let me answer the question without interrupting me, please.
You got it.
Burisma paid Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, $1 million a year, while Hunter Biden threatened Ukraine to withhold $1 billion in aid unless and until they fired the prosecutor investigating his son. Joe Biden threatened. Joe Biden is Vice President of the United States, and we just saw a video, which I would encourage every news outlet here to actually show the video of Joe Biden bragging how he told the president of Ukraine that he was going to cut off $1 billion, he was going to block $1 billion in foreign aid to Ukraine unless they fired the prosecutor. And in Joe Biden's own words, son of a bitch, they fired the guy.
So why not have Bolton testify? You said you'd answer the question. Hold on, Andrew.
I'm sorry?
Let me answer the question. I did ask the question. Why?
So I get that the press loves to obsess over the latest bombshell. Listen, I don't know what John Bolton's book says or doesn't say. I've seen the New York Times coverage, but at the end of the day, it doesn't impact the legal issue before this Senate. The legal issue before this Senate is whether a president has the authority to investigate corruption. So the House managers built their entire case on the proposition that investigating Burisma corruption, investigating the Bidens for corruption was baseless and a sham. Hold on, let me finish this. No, I'm going to finish my point, and then I'm happy to answer your question. The House managers based their entire case on the proposition that investigating corruption for Burisma and concerning the Bidens was baseless and a sham. That proposition is absurd. We've just seen, they said there wasn't a shred of evidence concerning corruption. We've just seen 2 hours of evidence. And at a minimum, it was not only reasonable and justified, but the president, I think, had an obligation to investigate corruption that potentially extended to the very highest levels of government.
Senator, over those 2 hours, none of the president's attorneys mentioned one single possible crime that Hunter or Joe Biden are accused of. Basically, what they said was Hunter Biden got a job. That was vice president. If that's a crime, I mean, shouldn't half of your children be in prison?
My children are 9 and 11, and I'm sorry that you want to throw a 9-year-old in prison. But at this point, my third grader plays basketball and softball at her school. So stop playing the nasty. No, stop playing the nasty Washington game.
I'm sorry, that's not nasty Washington game.
Attacking a 9-year-old?
Senator, I have no idea.
All right.
Senator, we've seen reports about a possible one Republican witness, one Democratic witness. Would you be open to that idea?
Look, in my view, additional witnesses are not necessary. The House managers have presented their case. They haven't come remotely close to meeting their burden of proof. Now, that being said, if the Senate later this week, when we vote on witnesses, decides to go down the road to additional witnesses, I think at a minimum, the most important witness for the Senate to hear from is now Hunter Biden. The House manager made a decision. Let another reporter have a chance.
Why don't you want to hear from John Bolton under oath?
I don't believe the testimony is necessary. The House managers have a burden of proof to prove their case. They have fallen woefully short. The standard under the Constitution is high crimes and misdemeanors. They have not demonstrated any law was violated. And the president was entirely justified in asking for an investigation of corruption concerning Ukraine and potentially Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. At the end of the day, there may or may not have been.
After you see this last hour that we just saw.
Isn't there a shadow over the president if you don't have testimony in a trial?
Look, the shadow over the presidency is the last several months of sham proceedings in the House where they only heard from prosecution witnesses and they ignored the very substantial evidence of corruption with the vice president going to the very top potentially of the administration. And by the way, the Obama administration pointed out the conflict of interest over and over and over again, and so did the press until the press decided to defend the House Democrats' partisan impeachment attack. This has been a sham from the beginning. Presidents have the authority to investigate corruption, and there was overwhelming authority.
All
right, I'm going to let these guys.
Senator Braun, on that one-for-one witness question, what do you have to say?
Oh, definitely. We get the witnesses. It'll be a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-2. But all I can tell you is I sat through this last hour, and that was the most powerful presentation on either side. And what it gets at is that the president had every right to look into corruption because he did such a good job of comparing what was overlooked during the Obama administration and how thick the Bidens were involved. In fact, the main takeaway from this is I'm sure now that they mentioned the Bidens 400 times in their own presentation, it's probably the vice president's worst nightmare of how this has risen to that profile.
So was it right to ask for a favor? I mean, that's what it boils down to, not the quick pro quo, but the fact that he asked for a favor from Ukraine.
Did you watch the video of Barack Obama? Well, it sure was today. Now we're coming down here. We're coming down here to tell you that we just spent the last couple of hours, and we're all here as senators to talk about this. And what we're going to tell you is what we've just seen in the last couple of hours, and what we saw in the last couple of hours was one on the issue of obstruction of power. And or obstruction of Congress and abuse of power. The argument on abuse of power, which is one of the 2 articles of impeachment, we spent a good hour going over what that actually means. And Ted worked at the Supreme Court. He was a clerk. We understand this. And I thought the most telling thing on that one of the 2 articles was the tape played of Chuck Schumer explaining to the country back at the time of the Clinton administration that abuse of power, that the president actually has an obligation to protect the presidency. And in terms of the 3 branches of government and protecting his branch of government, the president has an obligation to do that. And using executive privilege is part of that obligation. So we are clearly in
for a favor.
I'm just wondering, we already have 2 senators who want to maybe bring over Bolton. Are those 2 senators, and perhaps the 2 others who were perhaps looking at that, also serious about bringing over the witnesses that perhaps Republicans want? And are you all united in that?
Well, she's asking a question about witnesses. We're going to decide Friday on witnesses, but it's not going to be a one-sided issue. We have another day. We have this evening, tomorrow for the president's case to be presented. We have 16 hours of questioning on Wednesday and Thursday, and then ultimately the question will come, have we heard enough? Are we ready to go to final judgment, or do we need to hear from more people? If we need to hear from more people, it's going to be a group of individuals, but 51 senators will make that decision on Friday and not before Friday, regardless of what questions you ask.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
I think one of the final points that was made, I think, was very, very good in that why are we impeaching this president? What is the House manager's objective in this? I think the White House counsel has done a brilliant job in really shredding the House manager's case. And they have done it by using established law and the Constitution. I mean, they have spelled it out. We're not putting in fluff stories. They're not talking about, well, when I was a child and I grew up to be a judge. I mean, we're not talking about, they're presenting the law. And what I have seen our House managers do and other Democrats is take that Constitution, throw it on the ground, throw it right under the bus. And oh, by the way, let's not just throw it under the bus, let's put it in reverse and let's do it again. But why are they trying to impeach and remove this president? Is it because they know that he will be reelected this fall? The point that was just made in this last 30 minutes or so was that we have record unemployment here in the United States. We have a booming economy. People in Iowa are thrilled that we have the USMCA being signed and that we have trade deals done with China. There is so much going on, good and positive for this country, and the Democrats hate it that we have a larger-than-life president that has achieved that.
So would you like to see witnesses?
I think we have heard evidence. The House managers cut and pasted here and there to make it seem one way or another. The White House counsel has put that entire conversation by each one of the witnesses together and have disproven all the innuendo and gossip that the House managers based their case on.
So yes or no, witnesses?
So we have yet another day maybe of discussion coming from the White House counsel. We have our own questions that we'll ask, and then we will make that decision. But at this time, again, the White House counsel has absolutely shredded the case brought forward by those House managers.
And the final issue, the people that were everyone was paying close attention for the discussion about the Bidens, but the four people whose eyes were fully wide open were Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Michael Bennet, and Amy Klobuchar, all leaning forward. I'd never seen them all so attentive as when this discussion was on Joe Biden.
Iowa caucuses, folks. Iowa caucuses are this next Monday evening, and I'm really interested to see how this discussion today informs and influences the Iowa caucus voters, those Democratic caucus goers. Will they be supporting Vice President Biden at this point? Not certain about that.
So, we're going to wrap it up. The last hour was the crux of the trial. So I would really suggest there were more people listening and paying attention, and that last hour, I think, closed the deal. So I would look at that, and it was impressive.
Senator, you often call us fake news, but
I don't do that.
I understand, but this administration has.
That's okay.
And they quoted a number of reports in their defense today. Do you think that's fair then to call us?
All I can tell, I don't use those terms or words, but the president can choose to use them if he wants to. All I can tell you, the part of the trial that I think made the difference, and you ought to pay attention to it carefully, was just done in the last hour. I think that closed the deal for anybody needing more information. It was to just breathe deep, and we'll get to the question of witnesses, and we'll cross that threshold on Thursday or Friday.
Thank you.